And now it has actually happened. Israel has attacked Iran, and if you hear me out, you will understand that there is a link between what's happening in the US right now and this attack. Yesterday, I published this article on Substack warning of the impending Israeli attack on Iran and the false framing provided by the US administration and the mainstream media. And I intended to say that there is a very real chance that by next week Israel will have bombed Iran, and when it happens, it won't be framed as aggression. It will be packaged as necessity, as reluctant act, a defensive move, maybe even a preemptive mercy. But that was yesterday. Today, Israel has actually attacked Iran. At this moment, as I'm recording this, that's about 5 a.m. Eastern. It seems it was a full-scale preemptive war on Iran. They're calling it Operation Rising Lion. What is it really? A strategic earthquake. We're talking about 200 Israeli jets, 100 separate targets thanks to AI. Key nuclear facilities like Natanz hit hard. And it wasn't just hardware. Israel assassinated top Iranian brass. General Bagheri, IRGC chief Hossein Salami, gone. I think that's probably the bombs that we saw in Tehran. The justification? Israel says Iran's nuclear program crossed the red line. Enough enriched uranium for 9 bombs, they claim. Weaponization already underway. So Israel didn't wait. It struck first, hard, deep and wide. Also not a strategy that's new. And Iran didn't sit still. Over 100 drones launched back at Israel by sunrise. And Khamenei already promising bitter and painful retaliation. Yeah, we have heard that before, but this time the fuse is real. Jordan shot down drones in its own skies. Markets in Asia and Europe tanked. Dow futures down 500 points. Tel Aviv's under a state of emergency, missiles and more drones expected, the region's on edge. And the US? They say, surprise, they're not involved, just protecting personnel. Sure, hear me out. Oh, and here's one more thing. This all exploded days before a new round of nuclear talks were set to begin between the US and Iran. Make no mistake, this isn't just a military campaign. It's a message. Diplomacy is dead. US Ambassador Charles Friedman used exactly these words when I interviewed him a while back. And Israel is betting the world will back it again, or at least look away, as the world did many times before. Point is, Israel has to move fast enough. The question now isn't if it escalates, it's how far, how fast, and who gets dragged in next. My guess, the US. But here's the real story, the one that they tried to bury before the first missile had even been launched. Because this is not about nuclear weapons. This is not about diplomacy failing. This is about narrative control, because Israel is losing it. The control over the narrative, that's what they're losing. The US is enabling Israel, we know that. But this war now with Iran, it's supposed to be a reboot. Hear me out. Right before these strikes, behind the noise, a very quiet choreography was underway. Diplomats were evacuated. Talking points were distributed. Media briefings spun just enough to blur the lines between warning and justification. And it's all happening in real time, while everyone's eyes, your eyes, are completely somewhere else. But one thing is clear. This is not a region sliding into chaos. This is a deliberately engineered escalation. You really have to understand this. And if we don't stop pretending this is just another flare-up, we are going to sleepwalk into something catastrophic. And I don't use that word lightly. So what's the evidence? Let's start with the most obvious tell: evacuations. Over the past 72 hours or so, the United States quietly began pulling non-essential personnel out of embassies and military facilities in Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait, and probably some more locations they're not telling us about. At first glance, it looked like caution or precaution. But look closer, there is no troop buildup, no repositioning of defensive assets, no coordinated deterrence strategy. It's just a quiet exit. And in diplomacy, when you pull your people out but leave your allies in place, that's not a retreat. That's room clearing. That's what you do when you're giving a partner a green light to do something reckless, but you don't want any of your own fingerprints on it. That's called plausible deniability. So who's got the green light? Israel, of course. Now, I'm not speculating here. Israeli officials have said it themselves. They are fully ready to strike Iran's key nuclear infrastructure. Frodo, Natanz, Isfahan. It was never a question of if, but when. Netanyahu's wet dream finally seems to come true. Israel's military is in full alert. War rooms are active. The messaging is in motion. And the Western press? As usual, they've started outrolling the narrative scaffolding. Yesterday's headlines were filled with quotes like, "If Israel strikes, the US may get dragged into a broader conflict." Again, that's the framing they want you to swallow. Dragged in, against their will, etc., etc. That's the word. That's the framing. As if the US, the country that funds, arms and defends Israel at every conceivable turn, is some hapless bystander in this all. And they want you to believe just that. Let me ask you, when was the last time the US accidentally stumbled into a war it wasn't enabling? This isn't hesitation, this is orchestration. The evaluations are no longer about danger, they're about deniability. They send one message to Israel, you're clear to move, and another one to Iran. If you retaliate, make sure you don't hit us. That's not strategy, that's complicity wrapped in plausible deniability. But here is the real question. Why now? Why would Israel choose this very moment, when the world is already on fire, to risk another one? Simple. Because they're losing the narrative. They're losing the information war, and that's not a small thing. Without global support, Israel is virtually finished. After month and month of brutal bombing in Gaza, unimaginable horrors, after tens of thousands of civilian deaths, targeted hospitals, refugee camps turned into rubble, Israel is facing something it rarely does. Accountability. Not legally, of course, because international law is a punching bag at this point. But discursive accountability. They've lost the room. The global south is openly condemning them. European governments are starting to wobble, believe it or not, even the Germans. Young Americans, Gen Z and millennials have turned against the Israeli narrative. The old and tried script, "we are just defending ourselves," isn't working anymore. So what do you do when you've lost the moral high ground? You build a new battlefield. And Iran, it's perfect. Because Iran is the forever villain. The Islamic Republic, the mullahs, the missiles, the nukes. Never mind that US toppled the democratically elected moderate Mossadegh, which in the end led to the mullahs in the first place. But Israel doesn't need Iran to have a nuclear weapon. They just need it to look like it could. And right on cue, believe it or not, a gift from the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency. On June 8th, the nuclear watchdog confirmed that Iran had conducted non-yield implosion tests. That was all over the media. But what hardly got mentioned is the fact that Iran did these tests in 2003. That's 23 years ago. 22. So ask yourself again, why now? Why did the IAEA publish this just a couple of days ago on June the 8th? Coincidence? Of course. Now, implosion tests, that sounds terrifying if you don't know what it really means. In reality, it's a kind of simulation, a way to test bomb mechanics without an actual explosion. Is it provocative? Sure. Is it illegal? No. Does it mean Iran has a weapon? Not even close. But here's the genius of it, at least from a narrative control standpoint. It lets the Israelis say, as we heard many times before, remember Netanyahu with his bomb map at the UN, they are weeks away, days maybe. We can't wait, we have to attack. Again, Iran did those implosion tests in 2003. But once that line gets echoed by Western media, without context, without any nuance, the window for diplomacy slams shut. Suddenly the strike isn't an aggression, it's preemption. The story isn't a desperate escalation, it's a moral necessity. And the public, which is you, they are already primed to accept it. Because we have seen this play before. Iraq, Libya, Syria. A sliver of intel, a tiny little time collapse from 2003 to 2025, that's 22 years. A war sold on hypotheticals, launched in real time. And while all of this unfolds, what's the US focused on? Certainly not this. The media cycle is saturated with campus protests, riots in LA, Supreme Court drama, Trump trials, manufactured moral panics. It's destruction by design. Because if the public was actually paying attention, they might ask inconvenient questions, like, why are we evacuating embassies but not condemning escalations? Why is Israel threatening unilateral war and we are silent? Why does never again always translate into again, but somewhere else? You know what the most dangerous part is? It's not the bombs, it's not the jets, it's the silence. The same silence we see when it comes to the genocide in Gaza. The silence from Washington, the silence from Europe, the silence from so-called defenders of the rules-based international order. Because here we are, watching a premeditated, telegraphed strike taking place in front of our eyes. And what are we getting from the people who are supposed to stand for diplomacy, restraint, and the UN Charter? Crickets. That silence is policy. It's the kind of silence you use to let things happen while pretending they weren't your idea. It's what happens when inaction becomes a strategy. And the truth is, the US could have stopped this. Not with force, not with threats, just with pressure, with consequences, with a damned statement, one single statement. But of course it won't, because Washington isn't neutral. It's not watching, it's enabling, quietly, deliberately, like it always does right before a war starts. And while that silence holds, something else is happening too. Something just as calculated. Destruction. Because while Israel attacks its targets and the US clears its diplomats, the American public is being overloaded with noise. I already mentioned the widening unrests that are taking place even while I'm recording this, spreading from LA to many other cities like wildfire. Look, I'm not saying those things don't matter, but ask yourself, why now? Why this volume? Why this intensity? This saturation? It's not that these events are fake. It's that the timing is just too perfect to ignore. As a behavior analyst, this is what I'm looking at. California's Governor Gavin Newsom said it himself. On Friday evening, Newsom said that the situation in Los Angeles was peaceful before federal troops arrived. Then, and only then, all hell broke loose. He charged that Trump's intervention transformed a controlled environment into a crisis, and he framed the troop deployment as a theater, theatrically intended to provoke unrests, not to provoke public order. So I ask you again, why now? Why this volume? Why this intensity, this strategic escalation? Because the more fractured and furious the domestic discourse becomes, the less bandwidth anyone has for foreign policy. And that's the playbook. It always is. When you want to launch a war, you don't just sell it. You bury the alternative. You make sure people are too busy fighting each other to notice what's being done in their name. You make sure they are too distracted to see that the so-called defensive strikes are actually a desperate act of narrative control. Because this isn't just a geopolitical strategy, it's a reputational maneuver. It's a story reboot. Israel's credibility is in free fall. The Gaza campaign didn't just lose the moral capital, it exposed their brutal asymmetry that even the allies can't justify anymore. I said it already. Even the Germans are shaky. They've been labeled an apartheid state. They're facing International Criminal Court investigations. Their closest allies are squirming in press conferences trying to justify the absolutely unjustifiable. And here it comes. The only way out? Change the story. Escalate the threat. Make it about Iran. Because once it's Iran, the West falls back in line. Iran is the safer villain. The public doesn't know the nuances. You say implosion tests, they hear mushroom cloud. You say enrichment, they think Armageddon. It's lazy, but it works. Because it taps into already pre-programmed fear. Your fear. And that's gold in foreign policy and in propaganda. Now, let's be clear about what a strike on Iran actually means, because this isn't just hitting about a couple of bunkers in the desert. We're talking about multiple hardened sites, some buried deep underground, some near civilian zones. You don't just tap those targets. You need wave after wave of sorties. You need sustained escalation. That's why, with these strikes of last night, this is definitely not over. And Iran will retaliate. This won't be a clean operation. There is just no surgical strike against a country that size, against a country that is prepared. Have you ever looked at the map to see how large Iran actually is? And let's not forget the Iranians are Persians. Throughout history, they have shown that they have what it takes. And they have the willingness to pull it through. And that's the part the media never tells you. The day after will be chaos. And the week after, nobody knows. But one thing is for sure. Once you have opened Pandora's box, anything can happen. And yet, despite these stakes, there is no legal mechanism in place to stop any of this. Because the very institutions that should intervene, the UN, the ICC, the IAEA, have been neutered by the same powers who were planning this escalation. Let me walk you through this absurdity. Iran is still a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is not, never was. Iran's nuclear sites, even the civilian ones, are monitored under the IAEA safeguards despite frictions and breaches. Israel, on the other hand, has a clandestine nuclear arsenal, never declared, never inspected. And it has obtained some of the nuclear knowledge and material by spying and stealing from the US. You don't believe me? Watch this interview, links in the description. Now, what about Russia? That's the wild card people keep bringing up. The idea that a strike on Iran could drag Moscow into the mix. And on paper, yeah, Russia and Iran signed a military cooperation pact not that long ago. But in reality, I don't think Russia is jumping to get into this. At least not now anyway. They have problems on their own. They're bogged down in Ukraine, their economy is under strain, they're playing long-term chess, not poker. But what they will do is benefit. Because every time the US and Israel destabilize the region, Russia's strategic position improves. Oil prices go up, NATO gets distracted, the US burns more credibility on the global stage than it already does. Russia doesn't need to intervene. They just need to sit and wait and smile. The same goes for China. And that's also the tragedy of this moment. There are no adults in the room, no brakes on this machine. Just a bunch of actors playing roles in a play nobody wants to watch, but everyone is paying for. So yeah, this isn't just another war. This is a narrative detonation engineered in real time. It is well known that Israel wanted to strike Iran for a long time, not because it must, but because the information war is being lost, because Gaza backfired, because occupation can't be rebranded, because victimhood, once a shield, now cracks under the weight of raw footage on global outrage. And the US? It's not being dragged in. It's greasing the wheels with silence, with spin, with evacuations disguised as caution. with press statements that sound like warnings but read like permission slips. Meanwhile, the Western media, no surprise, still polishing the old lines. Defensive strikes, security concerns, unavoidable escalations. You've heard it before, you know these lines. But here's the thing. This time, people aren't buying it. The global south is calling it out. Generation Z and the millennials too. Young people see through it thanks to TikTok and co. And the ever-growing share of Western audiences are asking, wait, who is really destabilizing whom here? Now, if you want to go deeper, if you want the names, the timelines, the buried headlines, and the sources they hope you never read, then go to my Substack. You will find my full investigative breakdown there. The link's in the description.